Revenge with Ava. The first time I realized my life could be deleted with a single email was on a Tuesday that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. The kind of ordinary day you don't suspect will split you into before and after. I was sitting at my desk on the 31st floor, the glass walls showing the city like a postcard, when my calendar pinged. Quick touch base, 10 minutes. No subject, no agenda, just my boss's name, Daniel Hargrove, and the smug little video icon. I'd been at Northline Systems for 7 years, working my way from a temp with shaking hands to the person people quietly called when projects were falling apart. I was the one who stayed late without being asked, who fixed problems without taking credit, who knew where every skeleton was buried in the code base and in the conference rooms. I'd built a reputation on being calm, useful, invisible. That last part was my mistake. I clicked join, smoothed my bright yellow blazer over my shoulders like armor, and watched his face pop up in a sterile office with a background blur that couldn't hide the expensive shelves behind him. Daniel smiled the way men smile when they've already decided you're finished. "Morning, Sophia," he said, dragging my name out like it was a formality. "We're going to keep this short." Behind him, someone shifted. My HR rep, Kendra, her lipstick perfect, her eyes already apologizing. Daniel didn't bother with small talk. "We've had some concerns about your role," he said. "Redundancy, efficiency, the usual." He spoke like he was reading from a script and had practiced sounding compassionate. My stomach dropped, but my voice stayed level. "Concerns about what, exactly?" He tapped a pen. "We've had several IT issues traced back to your access, security flags, potential policy violations." I blinked. "That's not possible." He lifted his eyebrows as if I'd said something adorable. "Our internal audit suggests otherwise. We can't take risks." I heard my own breath, slow and controlled, while my mind raced through every login, every patch, every late-night emergency fix I'd done for his pet projects. I knew the system. I knew how easy it was to plant a trail. Kendra spoke, soft and practiced. "Sophia, we're offering a separation package. 2 weeks pay plus continued benefits for 30 days. You'll sign a release, and we'll need your badge dropped off today." I stared at the tiny camera lens like it was a weapon pointed at my head. "I want the report," I said. Daniel's smile widened. "There is no report you can review. This is confidential. We're done here." The call ended before I could even respond. My screen went black, and a second later my email froze. Then a red banner appeared. Access denied. Like I'd never existed. The air in the office suddenly felt too cold, like the building itself had been waiting to push me out. A security guard appeared at my cubicle within minutes, polite but firm, a cardboard box already in his hands as if this had been scheduled between meetings. My coworkers avoided eye contact, the way people do when they're relieved it's not them. I packed my life into that box, a mug with a chipped handle, a family photo, a notebook full of diagrams and late-night ideas, the tiny cactus someone had given me as a joke because I was hard to kill. I carried it to the elevator with my chin lifted, because crying in a corporate hallway is like bleeding in shark water. In the lobby, the guard took my badge and didn't even look at my face. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars honked, people laughed, a food cart vendor called out orders. My whole world had just been burned down, and nobody even noticed the smoke. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were sharp, my mouth pressed into a line, and the smirk that sometimes lived on my face was gone. For a moment, I let myself feel it, humiliation like acid, fear like a fist around my lungs, and beneath it, something darker. Not sadness, anger. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that gets quiet and careful. I drove home on autopilot, past billboards and glass towers, my mind replaying Daniel's words. IT issues. He'd fired me for the easiest lie in the world, because in a company like Northline, blaming the system was safer than blaming a man with power. By the time I walked into my apartment, my phone was buzzing with automated messages from Northline. Offboarding checklist, return of equipment, reminder of confidentiality. Not one message said thank you. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and stood in the silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Then I opened my laptop, not the company one, mine, and I did what I always did when the world stopped making sense. I looked for patterns. Northline didn't just cut people loose. They squeezed. They used you until you were bone dry, then blamed you for the mess. The timing wasn't random either. 2 weeks earlier, I'd refused to sign off on a data migration Daniel insisted was fine, even though I'd found a flaw that could expose customer records. I'd told him, privately, respectfully, that pushing it live would violate policy and might even break the law. He'd smiled then too, but it had been a different kind of smile, the kind that promised a bill would come due. I thought about the meeting he'd had with the board last Friday, the one I wasn't invited to. I thought about how my access could be flagged if someone created a shadow account or used my credentials, and how convenient it was that Northline's audit team reported directly to Daniel. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could call a lawyer. I could file a complaint. I could beg for a second chance. But I'd seen how those stories ended for people like me. Northline had money. Northline had friends in the right offices. Northline had the kind of legal department that could turn a person into dust with paperwork. If I fought them head on, they'd bury me and call it compliance. If I wanted justice, I needed leverage. And if I wanted leverage, I needed proof. My old security mentor used to say, in a place like this, the truth isn't what matters, it's what you can show. I took a slow breath, pulled my hair back, and began making a list. Every project I'd touched, every system Daniel had pushed me to rush, every late night call where he'd ordered me to just make it work without documenting the shortcuts. I wrote down names, dates, meeting invites, Slack messages, anything that could paint the real picture. Then I opened my personal email and searched for the one thing people forget is permanent: forwarded threads. Over the years, I'd sent myself notes, not secrets, just reminders, because I didn't trust Northline's internal systems to keep anything safe. In those old emails were attachments, screenshots, meeting summaries, enough breadcrumbs to start a trail. I found one from 6 months ago, Daniel insisting in writing that we skip the full penetration test because speed matters more than perfection. Another where he'd pressured me to grant temporary admin access to a contractor I'd never met. I remembered arguing with him, my voice calm while he raised his. If anything happens, it's on you, he'd snapped. And I'd replied, if anything happens, it's on the company. I didn't realize he'd been taking that personally. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a robot. It was a text from Mia Patel, my closest friend at Northline, and the only person who'd looked like she might stand up when security escorted me out. Are you okay? It read. Then a second message. Something's weird. Your accounts were locked before your meeting even ended. Daniel's freaking out about data exposure. People are whispering. I stared at the words until they blurred. If Daniel was freaking out, that meant he wasn't in control. And if he wasn't in control, it meant he was hiding something bigger than my job. I typed back with steady fingers, I'm okay. Don't talk about me at work. Just listen. She replied almost instantly, Sophia, he's setting you up. I saw Kendra print something from security. It had your name all over it. My stomach tightened. They were building a file. Maybe they already had. Maybe they were going to blame me for something that hadn't even happened yet. That's when fear turned into clarity. This wasn't just a firing, it was a frame. If they pinned a breach on me, my career would be over. No company hires the woman who leaked customer data. They'd make me radioactive. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor, and I paced my living room, the city lights outside my window flickering like distant fires. I needed proof of what they were doing, and I needed it fast. But I also needed to be smart. Northline wasn't just a company, it was an ecosystem of egos and alliances. Daniel wasn't powerful because he was brilliant. He was powerful because he collected people's secrets like trophies. He knew who cheated on expense reports, who drank too much at corporate retreats, who lied on performance reviews. He used those things like strings, and I'd been useful, so he'd kept me close enough to exploit, but far enough to discard. Now he decided I was a threat. I stopped pacing and looked at my bookshelf, where an old college textbook sat wedged between novels, Digital Forensics and Incident Response. I hadn't opened it in years. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages, not because I needed to relearn the basics, but because it reminded me of who I was before Northline dulled me into compliance. I'd chosen this field because I believed systems could be protected, that truth could be traced, that bad actors could be exposed. I hadn't chosen it to be someone's scapegoat. I sat back down and opened a fresh document titled Timeline. Then I started building my case like a story, because in the end, that's what it would be, a narrative with evidence. I listed, Tuesday, 9:50 a.m., access anomalies begin. Tuesday, 10 a.m., termination meeting. Tuesday, 10:05 a.m., accounts locked. I added what Mia said about Kendra printing security files. Then I thought of the one place where corporate lies sometimes slip, the vendor. Northline used a third-party security monitoring platform, BrightShield, because it looked good in audits. BrightShield's logs were external. Northline couldn't rewrite them as easily. If I could get a time-stamped record showing my credentials used from an IP address that wasn't mine, or activity happening while I was physically in a meeting, that would crack Daniel's story wide open. But how do you access vendor logs when you've been locked out? You don't. Not directly. You find a person. And I knew one. His name was Caleb Dorsey, a BrightShield account manager who'd once thanked me for catching a misconfiguration before it became a lawsuit. We'd exchanged numbers for emergencies. I stared at his contact for a full 10 seconds, weighing the risk. Then I sent a short text. Caleb, it's Sophia from Northline. I was terminated today. I think I'm being framed for an IT issue. Can you confirm if there were security alerts tied to my account and when they started? I just need timestamps. I hit send, heart pounding. Not because I was doing something illegal, but because I was stepping outside the script Northline had written for me. Immediately, I imagined Daniel finding out, imagining his wrath. Then I reminded myself, he'd already burned me. I had nothing left to lose except the truth. I waited, watching the typing bubbles appear and disappear like a heartbeat. Then Caleb replied, Sophia, wow, I'm sorry. I can't share full logs without a request from the client, but I can tell you this. Alerts flagged an admin token associated with your user at 9:47 a.m. today from an unfamiliar location. Also, there were multiple failed login attempts yesterday evening. That's not normal. Be careful. My breath caught, 9:47 a.m. I hadn't even joined the meeting yet, and yesterday evening, I'd been at home cooking rice and listening to a podcast. My hand started shaking, not from fear now, but from the rush of having something real, something external, something that didn't care about Daniel's story. I typed back, "Can you put that in writing, even an email to my personal address?" He replied after a pause, "I can send a generic statement that an alert was triggered and when. No details, but yes." I exhaled slowly, the first time I'd breathed fully all day. A generic statement wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a spark, and sparks start fires. I looked at my phone again. Another message from Mia. "Daniel just told the team you were under investigation and were not to contact you. He's acting like you stole something." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Under investigation. He was painting the walls with my reputation. I typed, "Do not respond. Say nothing. Save anything you can. Screenshots, messages. You didn't get this from me." She sent a single word. "Okay." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and felt the shape of my revenge forming. Not as a fantasy of destruction, but as a plan to survive. I didn't want to burn Northline down. I wanted to expose the rot in its core. I wanted Daniel to feel what it was like to be erased with a polite smile. But I couldn't do it with rage alone. Rage makes you sloppy. I needed precision. I needed patience. And I needed to understand Daniel's real motive. If he was willing to frame me, it wasn't just because I challenged him in a meeting. It was because I knew something that could hurt him. The migration flaw? The skipped tests? Or something I hadn't even seen yet? I opened LinkedIn and searched Daniel's name, not because I cared about his career story, but because I wanted to map his ambition. Promotions, connections, board memberships. He'd been at Northline for 12 years, recently promoted to VP of Operations. Board was considering him for Chief Operating Officer. That was the prize he'd been clawing toward, and if I was an obstacle, he'd remove me quietly. But what if I became a spotlight? What if the very tactics he used to climb became the reason he fell? My mind turned to the customers Northline served. Healthcare networks, banks, companies that couldn't afford breaches. If Northline had been skipping security steps under Daniel's orders, and if I could prove it, the board would panic. Investors would panic. Daniel's dream would collapse like glass. Still, I couldn't just shout it on social media. That would make me look bitter and unstable. It would give him ammunition to call me a disgruntled ex-employee. No, I needed to move like a ghost, collecting evidence, connecting dots, letting the truth speak through documents. I opened my closet and looked at my blazer collection. Bright colors I wore like defiance in a sea of gray suits. The yellow one hung there, bold and clean, like it belonged to someone who wasn't afraid. I touched the fabric and thought, this is not the end of me. It's the beginning of their mistake. Late that night, after hours of building my timeline, I received Caleb's email. It was short, careful, corporate, but the key line was there. Brightshield detected an alert associated with administrative activity linked to the account identifier assigned to Sofia Rivera at 9:47 a.m. Easter Time on date. I stared at it like it was a golden ticket. Then I saved it in 3 places: cloud storage, an encrypted drive, and a printed copy tucked into a folder labeled Lease. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in corporate life, it's that paper survives when systems don't. I went to bed with my laptop still open, my mind still working, and I dreamed of elevator doors closing, except this time, Daniel was inside, pressing the button, and no matter how much he smiled, the doors wouldn't open again. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. I answered, voice steady. "Hello?" A man's voice, low and urgent. "Is this Sofia Rivera?" "Yes." This is Agent Marcus Layton with the State Attorney General's office. We're calling regarding a potential data breach at Northline Systems. Your name came up. My blood turned to ice. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then my instinct snapped in. My name came up how? He hesitated. We have information suggesting your credentials were used during suspicious activity. We want to ask you some questions. My grip tightened on the phone. Daniel wasn't just whispering. He'd reached out to authorities. He was pushing the narrative fast before I could defend myself. I looked at the folder on my desk, my timeline, Caleb's email, my notes. Fear flickered, but it didn't land. Not anymore. Agent Layton, I said calmly. I was terminated yesterday morning. My access was revoked. I have reason to believe my credentials were compromised before my termination, and I have an external vendor statement showing alerts began at 9:47 a.m. yesterday, before my meeting. I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like legal counsel present. There was a pause, the kind that tells you your calm just changed the room. You have documentation? He asked. Yes, I said, and I think you should look very closely at who benefits from blaming me. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but I wasn't powerless anymore. Daniel had just escalated the game, and by doing that, he'd made one fatal error. He'd brought in people who didn't care about his charm, people who cared about evidence. I stared out my window at the waking city and felt something like a smile return to my mouth. Not because this was easy, but because the path was clear. They wanted a villain. They picked the wrong woman. By the time the sun climbed over the buildings and spilled pale light across my living room, the shock had worn off and something colder had taken its place. A focused calm that scared me more than panic ever could, because it meant I was thinking clearly, while the people who tried to destroy me thought they were already winning. After the call with Agent Layton, I didn't pace or cry or spiral. I showered, dressed in jeans and a plain black sweater, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my notes spread out like pieces of a puzzle that finally wanted to be solved. I called a lawyer before I called anyone else. Not a flashy firm with a marble lobby, but a quiet woman named Denise Carter, who specialized in corporate whistleblower cases and had a reputation for being patient and brutal in equal measure. I told her everything in one steady breath, from the firing to the fake IT issues to the vendor email. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "Good. You didn't talk yourself into a corner. Forward me everything you have. And Sophia, do not speak to Northline. Do not explain yourself. Let them hang themselves." Her confidence steadied me, but the real work started after that call ended. Because waiting is easy when you think justice moves fast, and unbearable when you realize it doesn't. Over the next few days, my life shrank down to evidence and silence. I didn't post. I didn't defend myself online. I let the rumors breathe, because rumors get sloppy when nobody feeds them. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Agent Layton followed up with a formal request for an interview, which Denise handled, setting conditions that made it clear I wasn't a scared ex-employee scrambling to save my name. I was a witness with receipts. That alone shifted the tone. The first crack came from inside Northline, the way it always does. Mia called me from a block number late one night, her voice tight and rushed. "They're panicking," she whispered. "Daniel called an emergency meeting with ops and security. He's pushing this idea that you acted alone, that you went rogue after being denied a promotion. He's telling people to rewrite timelines." My jaw clenched. "Rewrite how?" I asked. "Changing ticket logs, adjusting dates on approvals. He keeps saying it's about clarity." Clarity. The word tasted bitter. "Did he put anything in writing?" I asked. There was a pause. "Not yet," she said, "but he's pressuring people verbally. Hard." I closed my eyes. Pressure leaves fingerprints, even when it thinks it doesn't. Listen to me, I said. Don't argue with him. Don't agree either. Just save what you can. Screenshots, meeting invites, calendar changes, anything that shows a rush. She exhaled shakily. Sophia, I'm scared. I know, I said softly. That means you're paying attention. Hanging up, I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle in my chest, the same one that used to keep me up fixing systems that weren't my fault. Except this time, the system was human. 2 days later, Agent Layton and another investigator came to Denise's office to interview me. I wore a simple gray blazer, my hair pulled back, my posture calm. They asked about my role, my access, my relationship with Daniel. I answered honestly, without embellishment, because lies are loud and truth can whisper and still be heard. When I slid Caleb's email across the table, Layton's expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. This suggests activity before your termination, he said, which contradicts what Northline told us. Northline told you I caused a breach, I replied. I'm telling you they created a story to protect someone higher up. The second investigator asked, why you? The question hung there, heavy. Because I said no, I said. And because I knew where the bodies were buried, even if I didn't know what they'd done yet. After the interview, Denise squeezed my arm. They're listening, she said. Now we wait. Waiting turned out to be its own kind of war. Friends stopped texting, unsure which version of me to believe. Recruiters who'd been enthusiastic a month ago went quiet. My savings account ticked down slowly, each withdrawal a reminder that Northline had taken more than my job. They'd taken my sense of security. Some nights, doubt crept in like a fog. What if Daniel won? What if the truth wasn't enough? That's when anger would flare again, sharp and hot, and I'd open my files and remind myself that this wasn't a feeling, it was a process. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected place, HR. Kendra, the woman who'd sat silently on my termination call, emailed Denise requesting a meeting. The subject line was neutral, the subtext wasn't. In the conference room, Kendra looked smaller than I remembered, her perfect composure cracked around the edges. I need to correct something, she said, hands clasped tightly. I was instructed to process Sophia's termination before the meeting concluded. That's not standard. Denise leaned back, unreadable. Instructed by whom? Kendra swallowed. Daniel. My heart hammered, but I kept my face still. And the investigation? Denise asked. There was no completed investigation at the time, Kendra admitted. I raised concerns. I was told to follow orders. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Denise said, Are you willing to state that formally? Kendra's eyes flicked to me, then away. I am now, she said. That was the moment I understood something crucial. Daniel's power depended on fear, and fear has an expiration date. Once people see a crack, they start imagining escape. Word of Kendra's cooperation didn't reach me directly, but I felt its ripple. Mia texted a single line the next day. Daniel's sweating. Then things moved fast. The Attorney General's office requested full logs from Bright Shield, not summaries. They requested internal communications from Northline. The board announced an independent review, the corporate equivalent of putting on a seatbelt after the crash. Daniel sent me a message through LinkedIn, of all places, his tone syrupy and false. Sophia, this has gotten out of hand. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we should talk privately. I showed it to Denise. She laughed, short and sharp. Of course he wants to talk, she said. He wants you emotional and alone. She advised me not to respond, and I didn't. Silence, again, did more damage than any reply could. Inside Northline, the story began to shift. People who'd avoided me before quietly reached out, asking how I was doing, fishing for clues about which way the wind was blowing. I answered politely, vaguely. I wasn't recruiting allies. I was letting gravity do its work. Then came the email that made my hands shake, not with fear, but with vindication. Bright Shield's full report confirmed it. My credentials had been used from an overseas IP address tied to a contractor Daniel had fast-tracked, the same contractor I'd warned him about months earlier. The timestamps showed activity while I was physically logged into a meeting. The pattern wasn't just suspicious, it was blatant. Agent Layton called me that evening. "We're expanding the investigation," he said. "There are discrepancies we can't ignore." "Including Daniel?" I asked. He paused, careful. "Including decision makers." When I hung up, I let myself sit with that word. Decision makers. Not me. Never me. For the first time since that Tuesday, I slept through the night. The fallout, when it came, was quiet at first. Daniel was placed on administrative leave pending review. The board's language was sterile, but the message was clear. He was no longer untouchable. His allies scrambled. His enemies sharpened knives they'd been hiding for years. I watched it unfold from the outside, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me, because I'd loved that company once, or at least the idea of what it could have been. Now it was eating itself alive. One afternoon, as I was updating Denise on a call, she interrupted me. "You should know," she said, "Northline wants to settle." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. Settle what? Wrongful termination, defamation, retaliation? They're offering a significant amount. I stared at the wall, my mind racing. "And Daniel?" "Not included," she said. "They're cutting him loose." I closed my eyes. The money would help. It would rebuild what they'd taken, but it wasn't the point. "I want the truth on record," I said. "I want my name cleared publicly." Denise smiled. "I thought you'd say that." Negotiations dragged on, tense and exhausting, but the outcome was inevitable. Northline issued a statement acknowledging procedural failures and clarifying that I was not responsible for any breach. My LinkedIn notifications exploded overnight, validation pouring in from strangers who'd never doubted the headline but needed permission to believe it. Daniel resigned 2 days later. No farewell email, no praise, just gone. When I saw the news, I didn't cheer. I sat quietly, letting the weight lift from my chest. Revenge, I realized, didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like oxygen. The last message came from Mia. "He tried to blame you till the end," she wrote, "but nobody listened." I smiled then, small and real. The system had done what it always does eventually. It ate the man who thought he controlled it. And me? I wasn't invisible anymore. I was still standing, with my name intact, my voice steady, and a future that no longer belonged to people like Daniel. When the dust finally settled, I expected to feel triumphant, but what I felt instead was exposed, like the silence after a storm when you realize how much the wind had been holding you upright, and now you have to learn how to stand on your own again. Northline settlement closed quietly, the money arriving in my account without ceremony, a sterile transaction that tried to reduce years of stress and one very public betrayal into numbers on a screen. I paid off debts I didn't even remember making, rebuilt a cushion I'd watched erode, and sat with the strange knowledge that security bought back never feels as solid as security you never lost. Recruiters returned like birds after a fire, chirping about exciting opportunities, careful not to mention the months they'd vanished. I listened politely, but something in me had shifted. I no longer wanted to be invisible and useful inside someone else's machine. I wanted to build something that couldn't erase me with a calendar invite. Denise suggested I take time before deciding my next move, and for once, I listened to good advice. I traveled, nothing dramatic, just enough to feel the world again without my phone buzzing with false urgency. On a quiet train ride, I reread the timeline I'd built during the worst weeks of my life, and I saw it clearly now. The story wasn't just about revenge. It was about agency. Daniel hadn't fallen because I was smarter or louder. He'd fallen because I refused to disappear quietly. That refusal became a compass. When I came home, I turned down the flashy offers and accepted a consulting role with a small firm that specialized in incident response for companies who couldn't afford to get it wrong. Companies where no meant something. I set boundaries in my contract that would have terrified the old me. Documentation requirements, independent reporting lines, the right to walk away if pressured to cut corners. To my surprise, they agreed. Respect, I learned, often shows up after you demand it once. Months later, an email landed in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you for saying no." It was from a woman I'd never met, an engineer at a mid-sized healthcare company who'd been following my case quietly. She wrote about a manager who'd pushed her to rush a deployment that felt wrong, about the late-night anxiety and the fear of being labeled difficult. She said my story gave her the courage to document her concerns, to escalate properly, to protect patients she'd never meet. I stared at the screen, tears pricking my eyes, because that was the moment the last of my anger finally loosened its grip. The revenge wasn't just Daniel's resignation or Northline's apology. It was this ripple, this proof that refusing to be erased could help someone else stay visible. I replied to her carefully, encouraging her without turning myself into a hero, because heroes are just targets with better branding. Around that time, the news cycle dredged Daniel's name back up in a bland article about leadership changes and new directions. There was no mention of me, no apology, no lesson. And that was okay. I didn't need the world to clap. I needed to live without flinching every time my phone rang. I built routines that grounded me, morning runs, dinners with friends who'd stayed, therapy sessions where I learned to separate my worth from my productivity. I learned to wear my bright blazers again, not as armor, but as choice. One afternoon, months after everything had ended, I ran into Kendra by chance at a coffee shop. She looked relieved and older, like someone who'd finally exhaled. We talked briefly, politely. She told me she'd left Northline, that she was trying to do things differently. I wished her well, genuinely, because resentment had no more room in me. Walking back to my car, I caught my reflection in a window. Steady eyes, a small smirk back where it belonged, and I understood that the real victory wasn't winning a fight. It was refusing to let that fight define the rest of my life. Daniel lost his throne because he thought power was silence and fear. I gained my future because I chose clarity and patience. If karma exists, it isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It waits. And when it finally moves, it doesn't ask permission.
And that's the story. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves out there. The world is unpredictable enough.